A struggling single dad helped a woman fix her Mustang. She secretly owned $1 billion empire. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The stranger by the roadside, the sun hung low over the hills beyond Timber Grove, its last golden ray stretching long shadows across the cracked country highway. Caleb Hart tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his calloused hands still stained with oil and grit from another long day at the garage. His son, Noah, had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, his head leaning against the window, the soft rise and fall of his breath, a small comfort in a world that too often felt like it had taken more than it gave. They had spent the day fixing a beat-up Chevy for an old farmer who could barely afford the parts, let alone the labor. Caleb hadn't charged him. He rarely did when it came to neighbors who needed more than they could say aloud. It wasn't much, but it was how he kept his dignity. And in a town like Timber Grove, dignity often came cheaper than pride. The road home was familiar, lined with fading fence posts, weathered barns, and the quiet presence of pine trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Caleb was just a few miles from the house he and Noah called home. A creaky two-bedroom fixer-upper tucked behind the auto shop when he saw it. A sleek, vintage 1967 Mustang fastback, deep midnight blue, parked awkwardly on the shoulder. The hood was up. Caleb slowed instinctively, eyes narrowing. Then he saw her. The woman stood beside the open hood like a painting misplaced on the wrong canvas. Elegant, sharply dressed in a cream blouse and tailored slacks, her heels clicking softly against the gravel. Her chestnut hair was swept into a bun that hadn't quite survived the breeze. She stood still, arms crossed, eyes scanning the engine with a mixture of frustration and focus. It wasn't the posture of someone helpless. It was the posture of someone used to control and losing it. Caleb rolled to a stop a few feet behind the Mustang and cut the engine. He glanced at Noah, still asleep, then stepped out, the dry crunch of boots on gravel the only sound in the evening hush. "Evening," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "You need help." The woman turned slowly, her expression guarded. Her eyes, a striking gray, sharp and clear, met his with a kind of unspoken calculation. "I suppose that depends on whether you know anything about classic engines," she said. Her voice was calm, cool, but there was fatigue underneath. Caleb cracked a small smile. "Been fixing cars since I was old enough to walk. Mind if I take a look?" She stepped aside without a word. He leaned into the hood, scanning the engine compartment. From a glance he could see the issue. The fuel line had slipped free, a small problem with big consequences. A few more minutes and she'd have been stranded well past cell service range. "You got lucky," he murmured, reaching into his toolbox in the back of the truck. "I don't usually believe in luck," she replied. "Most folks don't until it runs out," Caleb said, tightening the connection. He worked in silence, aware of her eyes on him the entire time. Not the way most people watched a mechanic, with indifference or skepticism, but like she was studying a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. He tightened the last clamp and wiped his hands on a rag. "Try it now," he said. She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the Mustang purred to life. Her lips curved just slightly. "Impressive," Caleb shrugged. "Just part of the job." She stepped out again, reaching into her designer handbag. "What do I owe you?" He shook his head. It was 10 minutes of work. Not worth writing up a bill. She looked at him like she couldn't quite believe what he'd said. "You're serious?" "It's a small town," he said simply. "We help each other when we can." She stared at him for a long moment, then slipped the wallet back into her bag. "I'm Vivian," she said. Vivian Langford. The name meant nothing to Caleb. "Caleb Hart," he replied, offering his hand. Her shake was firm. "Clean nails, steady grip." "You're not from around here," he noted. "No," she said. Just passing through." There was something in her voice that told him otherwise, but he didn't press. A soft rustle came from the truck. Noah, now awake, rubbed his eyes and looked out sleepily. "That your son?" Vivian asked. "Yeah," Caleb said with quiet pride. "That's Noah." She smiled faintly. "Looks like he got your quiet eyes." Caleb didn't know what to make of her. She was polished but not fragile, elegant but not above getting her hands dirty. Something about her didn't match the image she projected, and something told him this was more than just a broken car on a back road. "You heading into town?" he asked. She hesitated. "Actually, I could use a place to stay for the night, somewhere quiet." He nodded toward the town ahead. "There's the Timber Grove Inn 2 blocks from the diner. Not fancy but clean. Tell Maureen at the desk that Caleb sent you." "Tell Maureen at the desk that Caleb—" "She'll treat you right." Vivian studied him like she wanted to say something more, then nodded. "Thank you, Caleb." He tipped his head, started to turn back to his truck. "And Caleb?" she called after him. He turned. "Sometimes," she said softly, "luck looks a lot like kindness." He didn't answer, just watched as she slid back into the Mustang and drove off, the taillights fading into the twilight. As Caleb climbed back into his truck, Noah yawned beside him. "Who was that, Dad?" Caleb started the engine, someone who might not be passing through after all. He didn't know then just how right he was. The offer behind the curtain, the sun had barely risen above the pines when Caleb Hart kissed his son Noah on the forehead and promised to be home before dinner. He didn't tell the boy where he was going or why he had dug out the old button-down shirt from the back of the closet. Noah didn't need to know about the strange invitation that had arrived just after dusk the day before, hand-delivered by a man in a charcoal suit who refused to give his name. The card had been simple, embossed with silver lettering. Argent Motors, Where Legacy Lives interview. 10-0 AM. Executive Division transportation arranged. Details enclosed. Caleb had stared at it for a long time before setting it down beside the dinner plates he was washing. The logo looked expensive, corporate, out of place in a life built from busted gaskets and oil-stained denim. Still, he had said yes. By 9:15, he was riding in the back of a sleek black sedan that hummed so quietly it felt like floating. The driver didn't speak, just nodded, offered a bottle of water, and turned the radio to a soft instrumental station. Caleb spent most of the ride watching the trees thin into skyscrapers, the open road give way to concrete canyons. Timber Grove faded behind him like a dream he wasn't sure he wanted to wake from. When the car stopped in front of the Argent Motors headquarters, Caleb swallowed hard. It looked like a museum married a spaceship. A curved glass facade reflected the sky, while vintage cars, pristine, gleaming, were displayed like art in the lobby beyond. The building whispered money, power, precision. He stepped inside, trying not to touch anything. A receptionist smiled and gestured him toward an elevator. "Ms. Langford will see you on the top floor." His heart skipped. He hadn't heard her name since the night she disappeared down that country road in the Mustang. He hadn't expected to. Truth be told, he figured he'd imagined most of it. The silk blouse, the eyes that had looked both sharp and sorrowful. But as the elevator doors slid open and Caleb stepped onto the 32nd floor, she was there. Vivian Langford, perched on the edge of a mahogany desk in a sun-drenched corner office, arms folded, eyes steady. "Mr. Hart," she said, as if greeting an old friend instead of a small-town mechanic she'd met once beside a broken-down car. "Thank you for coming." He didn't sit. "So this is your world." She nodded slowly. "Part of it." "Argent Motors," he said, looking around. "Didn't peg you for the restoration type." Vivian gave the faintest smile. "People rarely see the whole picture." Caleb crossed his arms. "Why me?" No preamble, no pleasantries. He had no patience for games. Vivian stood and walked to the window, where the city stretched like a painting beneath them. Because when my car broke down, you didn't ask who I was. You didn't try to impress or negotiate or sell yourself. You just helped. With skill, with heart. Caleb looked away, uncomfortable. That's just being decent, maybe. But decency is rare these days, especially where money is involved. He said nothing, so she continued. Argent Motors is expanding. We're launching a new initiative, blending traditional craftsmanship with modern engineering. We need someone to lead it, someone who understands legacy, someone who can look at a rusted chassis and see possibility. He let out a short breath. You think that's me? Vivian turned. I know it is. Caleb shook his head. I'm not your guy. I'm a single dad who barely makes rent. I don't do boardrooms and suits and corporate visions. She walked toward him, voice quiet. You do integrity. You do grit. That matters more here than polish. I want someone who doesn't forget where he came from. He studied her. For a woman who had every reason to hide behind power, she seemed exposed, honest, and tired, as if the weight of her name and empire had grown heavier than she could admit. I don't trust things that come too easy, he said. Vivian tilted her head. Neither do I. Silence stretched. Then he asked the only question that truly mattered. What happens to my son in all this? Her expression softened. You'd have a schedule that lets you be home for him. A private school scholarship if you want it, and a workshop designed to bring him in, not shut him out. Caleb swallowed the lump rising in his throat. No one had ever made room for Noah before. Not like that. He looked out the window, then back at her. You sure about this? Vivian didn't blink. More than I've been sure of anything in a long time. He nodded once. Then I guess we build something new. Her smile wasn't polished or powerful. It was real. Welcome to Argent, Mr. Hart. He-Man and the Machine. The early morning mist curled over the streets of Argent Motors, like smoke from a fire just put out. Inside the main workshop, steel and chrome gleamed under fluorescent light, and the air buzzed with the low hum of machinery and the scent of oil. Caleb Hart stepped into this world of quiet precision with his toolbox in hand and his sleeves rolled up, fully aware that every pair of eyes in the room was on him. He wasn't dressed like the others. No branded uniform, no name patch sewn over his chest. Just an old denim jacket, a faded Timber Grove ball cap, and hands that bore the story of years spent fixing what others gave up on. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. But he wasn't here to belong. He was here to work. Brandon Ellis stood at the far end of the workshop, arms crossed, jaw tight. A legend in restoration circles, and known as much for his standards as for his silence. Brandon had made it clear from the moment Caleb arrived that he wasn't impressed. This place doesn't run on charity, he had said that first day. If you want a spot here, you earn it. Today that test came in the form of a 1969 Dodge Charger RT, a muscle car whose soul had been buried under rust and time. Its shell sat dormant, engine lifeless, interior gutted. It wasn't just a car. It was a challenge, and Caleb had 1 week to bring it back. He didn't speak much that first morning. He let his hands do the talking. While others glanced at notes or tablets, Caleb relied on instinct and memory. He removed each part with the reverence of someone unearthing bones from sacred ground. Every bolt loosened, every wire replaced, was a quiet declaration that he had been here before, even if no one in this place knew it. On day 3, Brandon hovered near the workbench. You skipped the diagnostics, he said flatly. Caleb didn't look up, didn't need them. It's the fuel system. Timing's off. Carburetors gummed up. Confident, aren't you? Experienced, Caleb corrected. Brandon didn't reply, but he didn't walk away either. By day 5, word had spread. Other mechanics paused between tasks to peer at Caleb's progress. The Charger was slowly coming alive, its body sanded and primed. Engine rebuilt with parts Caleb sourced from memory, more than manuals. On the 6th day, he tuned the ignition, wiped his hands, and turned the key. The engine growled, then roared to life, its deep-throated purr echoing through the garage like a war cry. Silence fell. Then Brandon spoke. "You got lucky." Caleb wiped sweat from his brow and looked up, not with defiance, but with steady resolve. Luck doesn't torque a crankshaft. Brandon gave a tight nod. Not quite approval, but the closest thing to respect offered anyone in years. Later that evening, as Caleb packed up, he found a thermos of coffee on his bench. No note. Just the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had seen him for who he truly was. He took a sip and looked around the shop, the walls no longer quite so sterile. He thought of Noah then, back home with his sketchbooks and quiet dreams. Maybe this was more than a job. Maybe this was the beginning of something. As Caleb walked out into the twilight, he didn't feel like an outsider anymore. He felt like a man who'd earned his place. One wrench, one rebuild, one roaring engine at a time. Shadows from the past life at Argent Motors had started to settle into a rhythm for Caleb Hart. Each day brought new challenges under the hood, but also small victories. The kind that reminded him why he loved working with his hands. The garage was beginning to feel like a second home, and Vivienne Langford, the enigmatic woman who had opened this door for him, was no longer just a stranger with a broken-down Mustang. She was becoming something more. Then the quiet shattered. It started one morning with a flurry of missed calls and unread texts lighting up Caleb's phone. Confused, he opened one message containing a link to an online article. The headline hit him like a punch to the gut. Vivienne Langford's new flame. Mechanic or gold digger? His stomach dropped. He clicked the link. There they were, photos of him and Vivienne leaving a local cafe, taken from behind a parked car. The article speculated about their relationship, hinting at a romance born of ambition, not affection. They called him a small-town dreamer looking to climb the social ladder. Other media outlets picked up the story like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Langford's lover, a Cinderella story or corporate scandal. Argent Motors hires heartthrob with hidden motives." At the shop, Caleb could feel the shift. The sideways glances, the whispers, snide remarks floated through the air like oil fumes. Guess fixing cars isn't the only thing he's good at. Didn't take long for the boss to pick favorites. That afternoon, Vivienne walked into the garage. She looked composed, but her eyes told another story. Tired, burdened, and maybe a little scared. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't expect it to get this ugly." Caleb wiped his hands on a rag, eyes narrowed. "Who's behind it?" She hesitated. "Dominic Wells." He froze. "Your ex-husband?" She nodded. "He's a media mogul. When I left him, he swore I'd regret it. This is his way of punishing me for daring to succeed without him. Anger simmered in Caleb's chest. "So what? We let him drag both of us through the mud?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But we have to be smart. He plays dirty, and he has friends in very high places." In the days that followed, the headlines got worse. The innuendo, the speculation, it didn't stop. So they decided to fight back. Vivienne arranged a press conference. Standing beside Caleb, dressed in a sleek charcoal suit, Vivienne faced the cameras and set the record straight. "I hired Caleb Hart because he's one of the most talented restoration experts I've ever met. Period. His work speaks for itself. Then Caleb spoke. His voice was calm, grounded. I'm not here to chase fame or fortune. I'm here to build something with my hands and give my son a future I can be proud of. That's all. The media backed off, somewhat. But the damage lingered. Caleb knew this was just the beginning. Dominic had declared war. And though Caleb hadn't signed up for it, he wasn't going to let Vivian fight it alone. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Because truth, once spoken aloud, had a way of cutting through even the loudest lies. A love unspoken, then shared. The rain came down in sheets that night, drumming against the tin roof of the Argent Motors garage like the rhythm of something long buried, now awakened. The storm outside was fierce, unrelenting, but inside the garage, time seemed to slow. Tools lay scattered across the workbench, their edges catching the soft glow from the overhead lights. The Mustang fastback that had brought Vivian Langford and Caleb Hart together sat quiet in the bay, its engine stilled, but its presence electric. Caleb stood by the open hood of the Mustang, wiping his hands with a stained rag, though there wasn't much grease to remove. He wasn't working now, not really. His thoughts were elsewhere. Fractured moments of the past few weeks flashing like lightning. The media frenzy, the biting whispers at the shop, Dominic Wells' veiled threats. And then there was Vivian. She had shown up again that evening, unannounced but not unwelcome, drenched from the rain, hair sticking to her face, eyes shining not with power but vulnerability. She wasn't the enigmatic billionaire anymore. Not tonight. She was a woman trying to find her place in a life she'd been forced to fight for. You should have called, Caleb had said, handing her a towel. I didn't want to think. I just wanted to be somewhere that felt real, she had replied. Now, hours later, she stood across from him, her coat drying on a hook by the wall, her silk blouse rumpled, her heels long discarded. She had found one of Noah's old sweatshirts in the office and pulled it over her head. It hung off her frame like a borrowed memory, soft, oversized, and strangely right. You remember the first time we met? She asked, breaking the silence. Caleb looked up, half smiling. How could I forget? You looked like you belonged in a Manhattan boardroom, not stranded off Route 12. Vivian laughed, quiet and genuine. And you looked like someone who didn't want to get involved. I didn't, he admitted. But then you looked at me like you weren't sure the world was going to give you another chance. And I knew that look. Her expression softened. I think I stopped believing in second chances a long time ago. Yeah, well, Caleb said, stepping a little closer, his voice low, steady. Maybe that's the mistake we all make, thinking we only get one. The air between them changed. The distance closed. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was charged. Caleb studied her face, the fine lines of stress near her eyes, the curve of her mouth that never quite relaxed, the strength in the way she carried her pain like armor. He wanted to reach for her, but he didn't. Not yet. Vivian stepped forward first. You fixed my car that day, she whispered, and then you started fixing me. The words undid something in him. Caleb closed the remaining space between them, not with urgency, but with reverence. He cupped her face gently, like she might vanish if he moved too fast. And then kissed her. It was a kiss born of silence and storm, of late nights and unsaid words. Not hungry, but aching. Not rushed, but deep. The kind of kiss that asked for trust and gave it back. When they pulled apart, neither spoke for a moment. Vivian was the first to break the stillness. This changes things. I know, Caleb said, but maybe not in a bad way. She leaned her forehead against his. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone in without being afraid. You don't have to know, he murmured. You just have to want to try. Outside, the rain began to lighten, turning from a downpour to a gentle patter. The storm had passed. In the garage, something else was just beginning. They sat together on the bench afterward, wrapped in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said without words. Caleb handed her a thermos of coffee he kept for long shifts. She took it without hesitation. "Do you think the others will ever accept us?" she asked. Caleb shrugged. "Some might, some might. Some won't. Doesn't change what this is. Doesn't change who we are." She nodded slowly, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." In the quiet warmth of the garage, as thunder faded into memory and the world outside held its breath, Caleb Hart and Vivienne Langford found something they hadn't dared name until now. Not escape, not fantasy, but home. Lines in the dust, the headlines came faster than thunderclaps, and just as jarring. By the time Caleb opened his eyes that Friday morning, the damage had been done. His phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand. Messages, news, missed calls. The air in his modest apartment felt heavier than usual, like the storm outside the window had seeped inside. In the living room, Noah was already dressed for school, spooning cereal into his mouth with the distracted rhythm of a child who sensed the world around him had tilted slightly off axis. Caleb rubbed a hand over his face and reached for the phone. The first image he saw made his stomach knot. It was a photo of him and Vivienne, taken in the dim golden glow of the restoration bay, her hand resting gently on his chest, his expression soft, too intimate to be misinterpreted. The headline screamed, "From grease to gold. Has Argent Motors CEO risked it all for a romance with a mechanic?" He didn't need to scroll further to know the narrative Dominic Wells had unleashed. It was calculated, precise, vicious. At Argent Motors, the atmosphere was a sharp contrast to the polished professionalism Caleb had grown to respect. Conversations halted when he entered. The click of shoes on the epoxy floor echoed louder than usual. Brendan Ellis didn't even try to hide the scowl he wore like a second skin. "You seen the papers?" Brandon muttered, crossing his arms as Caleb approached the restoration floor. "Artemis," Caleb replied, jaw tight. "Doesn't matter if it's true or not," Brandon said, lowering his voice. "It matters what the board thinks. And right now, you look like a liability." Caleb wanted to argue, but Brandon wasn't wrong. He could feel it in the way the younger techs avoided his gaze, in the way that the executives barely nodded in passing. He headed straight to Vivienne's office. She was already there, standing by the window, shoulders squared but trembling ever so slightly. A copy of the morning's tabloid lay open on her desk, red markers circling phrases like conflict of interest, undue influence, and personal entanglements. "You okay?" Caleb asked gently. She turned to him, those familiar steel-gray eyes shadowed with worry. "Am I okay?" "Caleb, I spent years building this company from the ground up, piece by piece. And now Dominic's trying to burn it down because I dared to move on." He stepped closer. "Then we don't let him win. We fight." She almost laughed. But there was no humor in it. Fight with what? The board's panicking. Investors are pulling calls. They think I hired you because you were lonely. She nodded once, eyes glistening. They think I let emotion cloud my judgment, that I jeopardized the integrity of everything we built. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had risked her own reputation to lift him out of obscurity. The woman who had found shelter in his small-town stillness when the world grew too loud. "Then let me speak," he said. "Let me face the board. Tell them the truth." "Not about us. about the work, about why I'm here. Vivian hesitated. Caleb, they won't listen. Maybe not. But I can't stay silent and let someone else write the story for us. Later that afternoon, the boardroom at Argent Motors felt colder than usual. The glass walls, the sleek lines, the leather chairs, they might as well have been steel bars in a cell. Caleb stood alone at the head of the table. The board members lined up like judges. "We understand there's been complications," began a woman with clipped vowels and a nameplate that read Regina Holloway. Caleb didn't flinch. "I'm not here to defend a tabloid headline. I'm here to defend the work." He laid out blueprints, data, before and after restoration logs, feedback from clients, numbers that didn't lie, the transformations he had overseen, the craftsmanship he had poured into each chassis, each bolt. And when he finished, he looked each one of them in the eye. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said. "Not the headlines, not the job. Vivian gave me a chance, and I earned it. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe it's not me you should be questioning." Silence. Then, from the far end, a quiet voice. "Thank you, Mr. Hart. No decision was made that day. No verdict was given." But as Caleb left the boardroom, he caught the faintest nod from Regina Holloway. A crack in the ice. That night, back at home, Noah sat beside him on the couch, curled up under a worn quilt. The boy leaned against his father, eyes sleepy. "Are you in trouble, Dad?" Caleb hesitated. "Maybe. But I think we're going to be okay." Noah yawned. "Because you tell the truth." Caleb smiled, pressing a kiss to his son's hair. "Yeah, because we tell the truth, even when it's hard." Especially then. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the windows. No longer a storm, just a rhythm. And in that quiet, Caleb knew, whatever came next, they were ready. Lines in the dust. The headlines came faster than thunderclaps, and just as jarring. By the time Caleb opened his eyes that Friday morning, the damage had been done. His phone buzzed non-stop on the nightstand. Messages, news, alerts, missed calls. The air in his modest apartment felt heavier than usual, like the storm outside the window had seeped inside. In the living room, Noah was already dressed for school, spooning cereal into his mouth with the distracted rhythm of a child who sensed the world around him had tilted slightly off axis. Caleb rubbed a hand over his face and reached for the phone. The first image he saw made his stomach knot. It was a photo of him and Vivian, taken in the dim, golden glow of the restoration bay, her hand resting gently on his chest, his expression soft, too intimate to be misinterpreted. The headline screamed, "From grease to gold. Has Argent Motors CEO risked it all for a romance with a mechanic?" He didn't need to scroll further to know the narrative Dominic Wells had unleashed. It was calculated, precise, vicious. At Argent Motors, the atmosphere was a sharp contrast to the polished professionalism Caleb had grown to respect. Conversations halted when he entered. The click of shoes on the epoxy floor echoed louder than usual. Brandon Ellis didn't even try to hide the scowl he wore like a second skin. "You've seen the papers," Brandon muttered, crossing his arms as Caleb approached the restoration floor. "Hard to miss," Caleb replied, jaw tight. "Doesn't matter if it's true or not," Brandon said, lowering his voice. "It matters what the board thinks, and right now you look like a liability." Caleb wanted to argue, but Brandon wasn't wrong. He could feel it in the way the younger techs avoided his gaze, in the way the executives barely nodded in passing. He headed straight to Vivian's office. She was already there, standing by the window, shoulders squared but trembling ever so slightly. A copy of the morning's tabloid lay open on her desk, red marker circling phrases like conflict of interest, undue influence, and personal entanglements. "You okay?" Caleb asked gently. She turned to him, those familiar steel-gray eyes shadowed with worry. "Am I okay? Caleb, I spent years building this company from the ground up, piece by piece. And now Dominic's trying to burn it down because I dared to move on." He stepped closer. "Then we don't let him win. We fight." She almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fight with what?" "The board's panicking. Investors are pulling calls. They think I hired you because you were lonely?" She nodded once, eyes glistening. "They think I let emotion cloud my judgment, that I jeopardized the integrity of everything we built." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman who had risked her own reputation to lift him out of obscurity. The woman who had found shelter in his small-town stillness when the world grew too loud. "Then let me speak," he said. "Let me face the board. Tell them the truth. Not about us. About the work. About why I'm here." Vivian hesitated. "Caleb, they won't listen. Maybe not. But I can't stay silent and let someone else write the story for us." Later that afternoon, the boardroom at Argent Motors felt colder than usual. The glass walls, the sleek lines, the leather chairs, they might as well have been steel bars in a cell. Caleb stood alone at the head of the table, the board members lined up like judges. "We understand there's been complications," began a woman with clipped vowels and a nameplate that read Regina Holloway. Caleb didn't flinch. "I'm not here to defend a tabloid headline. I'm here to defend the work." He laid out blueprints, data, before and after restoration logs, feedback from clients, numbers that didn't lie, the transformations he had overseen, the craftsmanship he had poured into each chassis, each bolt. And when he finished, he looked each one of them in the eye. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said. "Not the headlines. Not the headlines. Not that he gave me a chance. And I earned it. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe it's not me you should be questioning." Silence. Then, from the far end, a quiet voice. No decision was made that day. No verdict was given. But as Caleb left the boardroom, he caught the faintest nod from Regina Holloway, a crack in the ice. That night, back at home, Noah sat beside him on the couch, curled up under a worn quilt. The boy leaned against his father, eyes sleepy. "Are you in trouble, Dad?" Caleb hesitated. "Maybe, but I think we're gonna be okay." Noah yawned. "Because you tell the truth," Caleb smiled, pressing a kiss to his son's hair. "Yeah, because we tell the truth, even when it's hard." Especially then. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the windows, no longer a storm, just a rhythm. And in that quiet, Caleb knew, whatever came next, they were ready. The autumn wind had a bite to it, sharp and insistent as it swept through the empty parking lot outside Argent Motors. Caleb stood in the shadow of the building, watching the last light of day drain from the horizon, his arms crossed and his mind tangled with worry. Inside, the boardroom lights burned late. Vivian was inside with her legal team, poring over the latest filings and reports. They had been at it for hours, lines of exhaustion etched into their faces. She hadn't taken a break, hadn't touched the lukewarm coffee that sat untouched beside her. Caleb wanted to go to her, say something to ease the tension he knew she carried like a second skin. But for now, he waited. When the door finally opened, she stepped out into the corridor, her eyes ringed with fatigue but burning with focus. "Yeah, it's cracking," she said simply, her voice low and calm. "Dominic's legal team just requested an emergency mediation." Caleb's brow furrowed. "Mediation? That doesn't sound like him." Vivian nodded. "It means the pressure's working. The investigation's scaring off investors. His board is starting to panic." He exhaled slowly, the weight of the past few weeks finally starting to shift. It had been a grueling climb, every step uphill, every headline another wound to patch. But now, they were standing on the edge of something that looked like hope. "You did this," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, we did this. You stood tall, Caleb, even when everything in you probably wanted to run." He looked at her for a long moment. There was no glamour in her, no, just resilience and truth. "We're not out of the woods yet," she added, "but we're close." 2 days later, in a sterile room thick with tension, Caleb sat across from Dominic Wells for the first time since the public war had begun. Vivienne was beside him, her presence calm but coiled, like a string drawn taut. Across the table, Dominic looked paler than usual, the bags under his eyes deeper, the arrogance in his expression diminished but not extinguished. The lawyers began. They discussed settlement options, apologies, statements to the press, but Caleb's mind wasn't on the paperwork. It was on the moment. Dominic had tried to take away his son, his future, his dignity. It was on the night he'd seen Noah cry. Not because of what had happened, but because he thought his father might disappear. When it was Caleb's turn to speak, he didn't look at the lawyers. He looked directly at Dominic. "You wanted to scare me off. You wanted to scare me off. Make me disappear. But here's the thing. I don't disappear. Not for anyone." Dominic blinked, the first real crack of surprise showing. "You went after my son. You tried to paint me as some kind of charity case, riding on her coattails. But I've worked for everything, every damn thing I have, and I will never let someone like you take that away." There was a long silence. Then Vivienne placed her hand gently over Caleb's. It was not for Dominic. It was for him, for everything they'd survived. The mediation ended with Dominic agreeing to withdraw all claims. He would issue a public statement, fabricated or not, that discredited the rumors he himself had planted. And most importantly, he would step away from interfering in Vivienne's affairs, professional or personal. Outside, the autumn wind greeted them again. But this time, it felt different, like a weight had lifted. Later that night, back in Timber Grove, Caleb tucked Noah into bed. The boy was still small, still innocent, but tonight he seemed older somehow, like the shadow that had followed them had finally been pushed away. "Dad? Yeah, buddy? Are we okay now? Like, really okay?" Caleb smiled, brushing a hand through his son's hair. "Yeah, we are." Noah nodded, as if that was all he needed. "Can we go camping soon? Like the real kind, with fire and marshmallows?" "Yeah, we can do that." When he closed the door behind him, he found Vivienne waiting in the hallway, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket from his couch. "He asleep?" she asked. Caleb nodded. She leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, she whispered, "I was so afraid you'd regret stepping into my world." He pulled her closer. "I don't. Not for a second. You didn't pull me in, Vivienne. I walked in, and I'm not walking out." Under the amber glow of the hallway light, two people who had almost lost everything stood together in quiet victory. No headlines, no battles, just breath and warmth, and the first taste of peace. And for the first time, the future didn't look so far away. The morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of the cottage behind Argent Motors, casting warm light across the hardwood floors. Caleb had sanded himself. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with lavender from the small garden just outside the kitchen window. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was home. Noah's laughter rang through the hallway, high and clear like a melody that hadn't been heard in years. Caleb leaned in the doorway, still in his undershirt and worn flannel pants, watching his son zip down the hallway with a model airplane in one hand and mismatched socks on his feet. "Slow down, buddy," Caleb said, chuckling. "Slow down, buddy," Caleb said, chuckling. "That floor's still got some splinters." "Sorry, Dad." Noah skidded to a stop just as Vivian stepped into the hallway from the guest room, now fully hers. Her long sweater hung loosely over a simple tank and jeans, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked every bit the woman she had never been allowed to be before, at ease, unguarded, real. "And what mischief is this?" she asked, arching an eyebrow at the model plane. "Mom's teaching me to paint flames on it later." Noah beamed. Vivian paused. Caleb saw it, a flicker in her eyes, a breath she forgot to take. But then her lips curled upward. "Yes," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "We'll make it look like it can break the sound barrier. Cool?" Noah chirped, then darted off again, the title slipping from his lips so naturally it left Caleb breathless. "Mom." Vivian rose slowly, her hands clasped in front of her. "He just said it, didn't he?" Caleb nodded, voice rough. "He did." For a moment, neither said anything. Then Caleb stepped closer, taking one of her hands in his. "He means it, and you earned it." Her eyes shimmered, but she only nodded, her fingers curling around his like vines around something steady. That afternoon, the three of them worked in the garden together, a modest patch of earth along the side of the cottage. Noah was in charge of planting marigold seeds, while Vivian and Caleb took turns digging rows for the tomato and basil plants. Caleb watched as Vivian knelt in the soil, dirt smudging the knees of her jeans, sunlight catching in the stray strands of hair that had slipped free. "You sure you want to do this the old-fashioned way?" he teased. "We could just hire some." Vivian shot him a playful glare. "Where's the poetry in that?" He grinned. "Didn't peg you for poetic. There's a lot you haven't pegged me for, Caleb Hart." He leaned in close, brushing a speck of dirt off her cheek. "I'm learning." Noah interrupted with a loud, exaggerated groan. "You guys are doing the gaze thing again. Can we just finish planting, please?" Vivian burst out laughing, her whole body shaking with it, and Caleb followed, the tension in his chest dissolving like morning mist. That evening, as twilight settled over Timber Grove, they sat on the back porch eating grilled cheese and tomato soup. Noah curled up under a blanket with a comic book, while Caleb and Vivian sipped tea and watched the stars appear one by one. "You know," she said softly, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder, "I used to think I was only good at building companies, fixing businesses, not people." Caleb traced gentle circles along her forearm. You're not fixing people, Viv. You're just showing up. That means more than you'll ever know," she sighed, the sound full of contentment and quiet ache. "Do you ever get scared that this is too good, too fragile?" He nodded. "All the time. But I think that means it's real." They sat in silence for a long while, the kind that only comes when no more words are needed. The porch light glowed softly behind them, moths dancing lazily in its warmth. Somewhere in the distance a train hummed through the hills. Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep clutching his model airplane, Caleb found Vivian in the living room, sorting through a shoebox filled with old photographs. She held one up, a black and white snapshot of her as a little girl, standing next to a cherry-red Camaro. "My dad's," she said. "He never let me drive it, but I used to sneak in and just sit behind the wheel, pretending I was going somewhere far away." Caleb knelt beside her. "You ever get there?" She turned, meeting his gaze with a trembling smile. "I think I did. Right here." He kissed her forehead, lingering. "Then let's build something that lasts." She nodded. "Let's grow roots, not just wings. And under that roof, modest, creaky, but theirs, a new life began to take shape. Not the glamorous, high-rise dream people had once expected of her, but something quieter, deeper, something that could finally be called home. The sun rose soft and golden over Timber Grove, casting long beams of light across the dew-speckled grass. Wildfires, birds flitted between fence posts, and the scent of spring carried on the breeze. In the driveway of a modest but lovingly restored home just behind Argent Motors, the deep rumble of a 1967 Mustang fastback stirred the still morning air. Caleb Hart adjusted the rearview mirror, his calloused hands steady on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The car gleamed, every inch lovingly rebuilt, not just by tools and time, but by everything he had poured into this new life. Beside him, Vivian Langford slipped on a pair of sunglasses, her lips curved in a quiet smile that only he could truly read. In the back seat, 9-year-old Noah buckled himself in with the kind of excitement that made Caleb's heart swell. "Are we ready?" Caleb asked, voice low and warm. Noah gave a thumbs up. "Let's roll, Dad." Vivian chuckled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "First stop, the lake," I promised Noah, skipping stones. "Then the lake it is," Caleb replied, easing the car onto the country road. The Mustang growled to life, smooth as a memory finally made right. They drove past fields beginning to bloom, past the old general store where Caleb used to buy oil filters and hot dogs in the same trip. Timber Grove blurred into the distance behind them, and in its place came winding roads, sun-dappled woods, and the open sky. It was the kind of morning that whispered of new beginnings. Caleb glanced at Vivian, who was watching the horizon. There was a peacefulness to her he hadn't seen in months, maybe years. She no longer carried the tension of secrets under her skin. The war with Dominic Wells was over. The headlines had quieted. The whispers had faded. What remained was this: a woman who had traded control for connection and found something more powerful in its place. Noah's voice cut through the hum of the engine. "Can we get ice cream after the lake?" Vivian twisted in her seat, smiling back at him. "Only if you teach me your stone-skipping technique." "Deal," he grinned. "But I'm warning you, I'm pretty much a pro." Caleb laughed, the sound catching him by surprise. It had been so long since it had come that easily. They reached a lake mid-morning. The sun shimmered off the water, and the woods behind them whispered with birdsong and breeze. Caleb laid out a blanket while Noah grabbed a handful of smooth stones and ran ahead. Vivian followed, slipping off her flats and walking barefoot in the cool grass. Caleb watched them for a long moment, heart full. He had spent so many years surviving, scraping by, doing his best for a boy who had already lost too much. Now he was watching that same boy laugh with a woman who had become something steady in their lives. Vivian didn't try to replace what they had lost. She simply added to it, piece by piece, until this family felt whole. Later, after fingers were sticky with melted ice cream, and Noah had fallen asleep in the back seat with his baseball cap pulled over his eyes, Caleb and Vivian drove on in comfortable silence. The road unspooled ahead, a ribbon of opportunity. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment. "No, but I hoped. That counts for something." She reached over and took his hand, resting it over the gear shift. "It counts for everything." They passed through small towns and wide fields, sometimes talking, sometimes not. And with every mile, the weight of old scars gave way to something lighter. When they reached a scenic overlook near the ridge, Caleb pulled over. The view was breathtaking. The valley stretched below them, green and gold, with a river winding through it like a silver thread. Vivian stepped out of the car, walking to the edge. Caleb joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Hard to believe this all started because you couldn't fix your car." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Or maybe it started because you stopped to help. Either way, I'm glad you did." He kissed her temple. Me too. Behind them, the Mustang ticked softly as the engine cooled. The sun dipped lower, and in the hush of twilight, there was no trace of the battles they had fought, only the life they had chosen, together. As they stood there, Caleb thought about the road behind them, full of detours, wrong turns, flat tires, and all. And he thought about the road ahead, unknown, maybe, but no longer alone. Because sometimes the road that changes everything doesn't start with a destination. It starts with a decision to hope, to trust, to stay. And on that quiet ridge above the valley, Caleb, Vivian, and Noah had never been more certain. They had chosen the right road. Together. Storms will come. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of the refurbished garage, casting golden streaks across the polished chrome of a '67 Mustang. Caleb Hart stood at the center of the bay, sleeves rolled up, grease still fresh on his hands. But this time, it wasn't just his project. Around him, half a dozen teenagers worked quietly on various parts, some tentative, others fully immersed, each one with a story that mirrored, in some small way, his own. "You're torquing too far left, Jonah," Caleb said gently, crouching beside the youngest of the group. The boy looked up, eyes wide under a worn baseball cap. "Try to listen to the wrench, not just feel it. Machines talk if you let them." Jonah nodded, adjusting his grip. Vivian Langford watched from the office doorway, arms crossed, a faint smile softening her sharp features. She was no longer the guarded woman Caleb had once met by the roadside. She was home, and more than that, she was finally whole. It had been nearly 8 months since they had launched the Youth Restoration Initiative, a program aimed at helping at-risk teens learn automotive restoration. What started as an idea scribbled on the back of a diner napkin was now a thriving part of Timber Grove's heart. Some mornings, they worked in silence. Other days, music filled the bays. Oldies, country, and sometimes even the bold rhythm of hip-hop when Caleb let the kids pick. Each soundscape had its own story, its own rhythm, just like every child who walked through the garage door. "Miss Vivienne," a girl named Tasha called from across the shop, waving a greasy cloth. "Can I come see the intake system with you later?" Vivian stepped forward without hesitation. "You bet! But only if you promise not to leave your tools scattered everywhere again." Tasha giggled. "No promises." Caleb chuckled as Vivian passed him, brushing a light hand over his shoulder in a gesture that had come to mean everything. No words, just presence, steady, real. But even in the warmth of this new chapter, shadows didn't vanish. One afternoon, an envelope arrived at the garage addressed to Caleb in blocky, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a clipping from a national business magazine. The headline read, "From Grease to Glamour, Langford's risky romance fuels public debate." The article rehashed every detail of their relationship, from the night they met to the custody battle with Dominic Wells. Caleb's criminal record was mentioned, albeit briefly. It was sensationalized, clearly planted to stir doubt. He read it once, then again. Vivian found him on the bench, behind the garage, staring out across the gravel lot where Noah was shooting hoops alone. She sat beside him quietly. "It never ends, does it?" he asked after a long pause. She exhaled. "Storms always come, Caleb, but we don't have to stand in them alone anymore." He looked at her, searching her eyes for any sign of regret. He found none. "I keep thinking one day it'll all settle," he muttered, "that people will stop looking for cracks to crawl into." Vivian laced her fingers through his. "Maybe they won't. But look out there." He followed her gaze to the teens in the garage, laughing, learning, rebuild. "We're not here to make the world approve of us," she said. "We're here to build something better, even if it's one broken carburetor at a time." That night, as a late spring storm rolled across the horizon, thunder echoing in the distant hills. Caleb tucked Noah into bed. The boy looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Are we going to be okay, Dad? Even when people say bad stuff?" Caleb kissed his forehead. "Yeah, bud, we will, because truth sticks longer than headlines, and because we have each other." Later, he found Vivian on the front porch, wrapped in a flannel blanket, sipping tea. Rain pattered against the tin roof in a rhythm that had once been lonely, but now felt like home. He sat beside her. "We should name it," she said suddenly. "Name what?" The initiative. "Something more than just a project name. Something lost." Caleb thought for a moment, then smiled. Second gear, she turned to him. Second chances. New starts. He nodded. It fits, and it did. By summer, Second Gear had its own sign out front, painted by Tasha herself, bold letters framed by silver flames. The garage was no longer just a repair shop. It was a sanctuary, a second home, a place where the broken found not just repair but renewal. Storms would come. They always did. And for Caleb Hart and Vivian Langford, that made all the difference in the world. The air was crisp with late autumn, scented with fresh paint, old oil, and blooming marigolds in mismatched pots outside the newly refurbished garage. The hand-painted sign read, "Second Gear Restoration and Training Center." Beneath it, laughter trickled out from inside, soft and warm, like the light from the hanging Edison bulbs. Caleb Hart stood in the corner of the room, a glass of lemonade in one hand, calloused fingers loosely wrapped around it, and his gaze fixed across the space. Vivian was crouched beside Noah, both of them polishing the fender of the same 1967 Mustang that had brought them together. They were laughing about something Caleb couldn't hear, but the sound was enough. It was the sound of home. He had never imagined this would be the ending, or beginning, depending on how one looked at it. A single dad, a billionaire heiress turned mechanic mentor, and a 9-year-old boy who had once asked if stars made wishes come true. Caleb smiled quietly. Maybe they did. The small crowd gathered for the opening ceremony included townsfolk, a few journalists who'd come not for a scoop, but for the humanity in the story, and several of the young trainees from the program's first cohort, kids with tough pasts, untamed talent, and eyes like flint waiting for spark. Brandon Ellis, once a skeptic, now one of the lead trainers, clinked his plastic cup against Caleb's. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, his voice still gruff, but lined with something softer. "Me neither," Caleb admitted. "She changed you," Brandon added, nodding toward Vivienne. Caleb didn't answer right away. He watched as Vivienne ruffled Noah's hair, her own sleeves rolled up, grease on her cheek. Not a performance. Just her. "She reminded me who I was," he said finally. "Not someone broken, just someone rebuilding." Vivienne stood up and caught Caleb's eyes from across the room. She smiled, that kind of quiet, anchored smile that said she saw every version of him and loved them all. Caleb lifted his cup slightly, a silent toast to her. The ceremony began without pomp. No flashy speeches, just a few honest words. Caleb walked to the front, cleared his throat, and looked out at the gathered faces. Some familiar, some brand new. "We built this place on second chances," he said. "Not just for cars, but for people." Every dent, every scar, every rebuild tells a story, and every story matters. If you're here, it means you believe that too. So thank you for trusting us, for showing up. A few heads nodded. One of the students, a 17-year-old named Miles, wiped his eyes discreetly. Caleb continued, voice steady. "There was a time when I thought all I could be was a man surviving day to day. But love, real love doesn't just keep you alive. It teaches you to live. This place, this family, it's proof of that." As the crowd applauded, Vivian joined him at the front. She reached for his hand without hesitation. "I used to think success meant standing alone at the top," she said. "Now I know it means standing together, especially when the wind blows hardest." The Mustang gleamed behind them, not just as a symbol of restored machinery, but of lives written, of miles traveled together, of roads not taken alone, of roads not taken alone. When the crowd began to disperse, Noah tugged at Caleb's sleeve. "Can we go for a drive? Just us three?" Caleb ruffled his son's hair. "You read my mind, kiddo." Vivian slid into the passenger seat. Caleb took the wheel. Noah climbed into the back, feet swinging in excitement. They pulled out of the gravel lot, the Mustang humming with purpose, not speed, just steady, true motion. Out past the edge of town, where the trees wore their last golden leaves and the road stretched long and quiet. Caleb glanced in the rearview mirror. Noah was grinning out the window, eyes full of wonder. Vivienne reached over and laced her fingers through his. "Where to?" she asked. Caleb smiled. "Forward. Always forward." And so, with the engine warm and love in every turn of the wheel, they drove to the horizon, a family not made by blood, but by choice. And the road ahead, whatever it held, belonged to them. Together. Together. The story of Caleb, Vivienne, and Noah isn't just about love and second chances. It is a heartfelt reminder of the power of trust, perseverance, and kindness in today's world. In a time when people are often judged by their past, status, or appearance, Caleb, a single father with grease-stained hands, chose to stop and help a stranger on the side of the road. That simple act became the turning point that changed his life, proving that even the smallest gestures can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. In real life, many of us feel stuck by responsibility, old wounds, or the belief that our dreams are behind us. But like Caleb, who thought his life had already been shaped by loss, we may find ourselves offered a second chance if we're willing to look beyond the immediate struggle and believe in the possibility of change. Vivienne, the woman who seemed to have everything, was carrying her own hidden scars, burdens no one could see behind her powerful exterior. She reminds us that even the strongest people need someone to lean on, someone to trust. It's a powerful message. Sometimes real love isn't about perfection, but about presence, about the courage to share our vulnerabilities and let someone truly see us. This story also delivers a powerful message about facing life's storms, be it toxic media, painful pasts, or society's judgments. Those storms don't stand a chance when we stand together. Love, in its truest form, is not just a feeling. It's a choice we make over and over. To stay, to fight, to rebuild from the rubble. In today's fast-paced world, where relationships are often tested by work pressures, public scrutiny, or unresolved history, Caleb and Vivian teach us about commitment. They show us that family doesn't always begin with blood. It begins with the choice to love, to believe in each other, and to walk side by side through sunshine and through storms. We all have a broken Mustang in our lives, something old, worn, but still full of worth. And sometimes, all it takes is one person who's willing to stop, open the hood, and say, "I believe in your ability to be restored." Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from the heartland of America, a quiet countryside, or maybe a bustling city, dreaming of open fields? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of warmth in your day, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another uplifting story like this. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.